At present, the current treatment of immigrants might be as fair as we can make it.
At present, the current treatment of immigrants is unfair.
The American Religious Town Hall meeting is now in session.
Welcome, friends, to the American Religious Town Hall meeting, where the discussion of religious, political, and social issues is meant to promote the cause of religious freedom and to help us better understand each other. And now, here is your host and moderator.
Welcome, viewers. Thank you for joining us for a very timely conversation today. My name is Andrea Luxton. I'm the president of Andrews University in Michigan, and I am today's moderator. We have a panel here ready to discuss this topic, and I'd like them to introduce themselves.
I'm Bishop Michael OLSON, and I serve as the Bishop of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Fort Worth.
Hi, my name is Rabbi Dan Levin. I serve as Senior Rabbi at Temple Bethel in Boca Raton, Florida.
And I'm Tom Plumbley. I'm a minister in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. I serve as Senior Minister at First Christian Church, Fort Worth, Texas.
Hi, I'm Tony Matthews. I serve in the area of missions, church planting, and evangelism for a network of churches in Texas.
And now to today's topic. The recent Russian war on Ukraine has demonstrated something about the media. They seem to favor one group of refugees over another. They treat different groups of refugees differently. Ukrainian refugees, for instance, are said to be courageous and are supported by the media. The recent violence in Haiti, however, brought a different tone to media coverage. The Haitians running from the violence following the assassination of their president did not earn such accolades, nor has the violence that spawned a spate of refugees from places like El Salvador, Guatemala, or Nicaragua. When Afghanistan was overrun by the Taliban, America did its best to relocate refugees first in military bases in Europe and the US, but then in towns around the country. Now we find Ukrainians being given spaces at the head of the line, while Latin Americans of all kinds who have been waiting must wait longer. So we would like our panelists to enter this discussion keeping in mind this situation. Here are our questions. Given the heavy load of immigration requests, is the current system fair? Should all immigrants be treated in the same way, or should some be prioritized over others? And what can people of faith do to help the situation, first with the immigrants, and secondly, maybe even with Congress? I'll turn to those who began our conversation for the comments.
It's good being here, and thank you for the topic. Whenever I'm talking about the immigration issue, I always put myself in the shoes of individuals who are in countries that are where they're trying to flee the country, where there's just atrocities taking place. And so I want to say from the beginning that my heart goes out to immigrants and to people who are met with all kinds of violence and can't make enough money to feed their families. And I think it is a testimony to the United States that people want to come here. I think that's a good thing, you know, that they're trying to come. And I mentioned on the outset that the current treatment of our immigrants might be, and I want to emphasize that, as best as we can, as fair as we can as it can be. I'm not an expert in this area. I do know that it's a huge job for the border. I know that there's a lot of individuals who are coming over the border who aren't coming for positive reasons. And I think the system is broken, but the people who work at the border I just feel for them because I see them on television. I hear them speaking about how many hours they have to put in and the devastation that they see with everything from the sex trafficking to drug trafficking. So I think it's a major problem. But I don't know how to fix this, and I don't know if our government is actually doing enough. I think each year the president is requested to consult with Congress to set an annual number of refugees and immigrants who are admitted in the U.S. It's unclear if that's being followed to the T. But I do know that with the Ukrainian situation, I think one reason people may think, and it could be correct, or it could be incorrect, but the perception is that there's a double standard. And I'm not here to say it is or it's not, but the perception is certainly there. And I think with the Ukrainian situation that we have, we have been inundated with people being killed. You're seeing folks with their hands behind their backs, tied, laying in the streets. I think the media is showing so many awful photos and pictures and clips of what's happening in Ukraine, where to the point where the level of sympathy, and correctly so, has risen to a point where some may be pushed to the front of the line. So this is a tough thing. You asked the question, what can the faith community do? I think once we certainly need to pray for our migrants and our refugees in all these countries. Our Latinos, the Ukrainians, folks who are really struggling in their homeland. We need to pray for them, pray for the government. We need to pray that our government will work with the other governments to implement some robust policies that will help these immigrants in their homeland. And so, and we'll have more to say. We'll have more to say about that later on.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Tony. I appreciated your comments. I think my point about it being incredibly unfair right now is that there is no system. I mean, really, in effect, we don't have a sound border, at least materially speaking at this point, and you need a sound border for the sense of peace. We also don't want to really fix the immigration system, which has been broken a long time, because it's in the interest of neither party, the short-term interest, to fix it. Whether it's cheaper labor on one hand or votes that on the other hand, in either way, there's some self-interest involved there. And the problem is that who gets lost in the middle are both migrants and refugees. I'd like to make the distinction, too, between refugees and migrants. A refugee is someone who is in danger of loss of life in his own country or her own country. Because of either religious reasons, political reasons, etc., where they are threatened. An immigrant is someone who is trying to leave their country to go elsewhere in order to better provide for their family, both here and abroad. I think these are important distinctions. Immigration really depends on sound borders, but it also depends on a multinational, international approach to resolving the problem, which currently is not being successfully employed here with regard to the South American, Central American immigrants and refugees. And it's a little better applied in the case of the Ukraine because the war is affecting all of Europe. And I think the European nations have stepped on that. However, Europe is also, though, struggling when it comes to immigrants or migrants and refugees coming from North Africa, coming from Africa. And so the issue of race is certainly credible there. Another issue is education, is that when people come here, how are they going to be able to fit in society and provide for their family? and also how do you unite their families? These are complicated questions, and it requires an international approach. The other thing that has to be looked at with regard to the issue, I think, of migrants and refugees at our border, and the southern border, is especially human trafficking and drug trafficking. In many cases, many of these people are already enslaved and are being marched to the border at gunpoint. The cartels are running things, and other countries from where they're coming, their governments aren't able to respond, or their governments have been so corrupted by the presence of the drug cartels that it's ineffective. And so that also has to be addressed internationally through a joint effort by nations and our leaders. Religious groups, I think, have a responsibility, first of all, to welcome the migrant and the refugee, to protect their families, maintain the integrity of society, and realize that there are limits in what people are able to do with regard to material resources. How do we ration those appropriately, and how do we, as people of faith, work with other people of faith throughout the world? And I agree, prayer is essential, but it's not the only thing we should do.
This seems an almost impossible situation. Let's hear what everyone else has to say.
So I think that I'd like to sort of take some of the things that were shared and look at it through a bit of a textual lens. So in Jewish tradition, there are a whole variety of different sources that teach that you are obligated to defend your borders and to defend them robustly against invasion or against pernicious threat. But a much larger source in our tradition teaches the idea that you have to open your home wide to those who are vulnerable. So the prophet Jeremiah wrote in, Isaiah, I should say, wrote in chapter 58 that it is our obligation to bring the poor into our home. The Psalms say, that we are supposed to be reminded that we are like our forebears, strangers, and we have to remember our experience as being the stranger. There is the reference of loving the stranger more than 30 times in the first 5 books of the Bible, up to 36 different mentionings of our responsibility to love the stranger. And so when so much of our textual tradition, so much of our spiritual DNA says, vulnerable person, my responsibility, we have a moral crisis in America where there's sort of this race to the bottom of who can be more xenophobic than the other person. There is no question that there are really, really serious challenges in trying to stem the tide of human trafficking, to stem the flow of drugs into our country, and a lot of the pernicious threats that we're trying to deal with at the border. But we've used that now as a boogeyman to say no immigration, full stop. And that has caused an enormous crisis. I think part of the reason why we're seeing people desperately try to scale walls or cut through fences or run across deserts is because there is no path through a legal channel that will allow them a smooth process of an asylum claim or a refugee claim. Those are not the same, by the way. And I think that we have to name the fact that there is a significant challenge when people from Latin America who are dealing with what we might call an internal slow burn need to escape from an asymmetrical warfare situation in a failing state like Haiti, like Honduras and other places, and people who are dealing with a conventional war threat that we're seeing in Ukraine. But I have to say, I think America's response to all of these crises has been immoral and anemic. When you consider that there are now 5 million refugees that have fled the war in Ukraine, 5 million refugees, and the Biden administration said, all right, we'll take 100,000 of them, and that there was an uproar over 100,000, which is a drop in the bucket when you consider that much poorer nations like Poland or Moldova, the poorest nation in Europe, are having to deal with 1 million refugees. And I think that's just fundamentally immoral for the richest nation of the world to say, sorry, our doors are closed.
Yeah, I think we all have pointed to the fact that this is a core issue for all of us. The Rabbi, you mentioned that the notion of caring for widows and orphans and strangers at the gate is throughout Hebrew Scripture. It continues in the New Testament as well. That concern for welcoming the stranger. So yes, this is a moral crisis. I think Bishop, you mentioned race. I think there is race involved in the difference between how we look at one group of people as opposed to another. I do think that the Ukrainian situation is a sort of violence that we can wrap our heads around. It's a land invasion. We see bombed out cities. We hear of war crimes. That's the kind of violence we can get our heads around. But as Rabbi Levin said, what's going on in Central and South America and in the Caribbean, in places like Haiti, is more of a slow burn sort of violence. It is something from which people are fleeing, but for those of us on the receiving end, on the north side of the Rio Grande, and it's interesting that the four of us here are from either Texas or Florida, states that really are struggling with this because we see so many of the refugees. I think we have to understand that the danger to people from cartels, from gangs, from wars in Central and South America. The dangers, I mean, it's an autocracy versus democracy thing in those countries as well as in Eastern Europe. So we need to take more care with the way we talk about and seek to educate ourselves about and seek to be in response to those who are coming from Central and South America and the Caribbean, just as we're trying to exercise some sympathy for those who are coming from Ukraine.
Yeah, and that's the challenge. As you mentioned, I think all of us, I think we care for humanity. We want people to have the best chances in life. In addition, we have some really awful things happening at the border. Folks, the fentanyl. I mean, look how many folks have died with the drugs, and then the human trafficking, as we mentioned. As a Baptist, we've adopted a resolution several years ago that encouraged pastors to address the immigration issue with their local churches and to exhort their congregation to serve their immigration communities, and also to affirm that all immigrants are either brothers or sisters in Christ or that they are in need of a relationship. And so we, once they get here, we need to really care for them. And then when they're out of the country, we need to pray for them and pray for their governments.
I really appreciated the notion that the bishop brought up that this is an international problem. Just as we are working internationally in Europe to solve some of this problem, both the invasion by the Russians and the refugee crisis that it's caused, we need to be working in concert with whoever in so many other countries whose citizens are being driven away by the dozens of other causes unique to those situations. All of that requires all of us to be working together across international lines. If we're going to uphold democracy, if we're going to fight authoritarianism, put it on that level if you want to.
Thank you. All right, we're going to have to have a pause. Let's look for a break.
We hope you're enjoying today's program. If you'd like to learn more about the American Religious Town Hall, please visit our website at americanreligious.org. That's americanreligious.org. There you can read about the vision and history of the program, and we invite you to become a ministry partner, explore our Town Hall Estates healthcare facilities, and view past programs by clicking the appropriate menu buttons. Each week, we look forward to receiving your letters. You may write us at the address shown on your screen. Send your letters to American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. If you have a prayer request, please send it to prayerrequest@americanreligious.org. Thank you for writing and thank you for watching. Now, back to today's closing statements.
What a complex topic we have today. We have the treatment of people in the country and then those not yet here. And, can things be done better? I don't know. We'll see what the panelists have to say to wrap things up today.
Our current immigration system and refugee system in response that our country takes requires a federal response, it requires a response on our state governments, and it requires a response as well in our local communities, a disposition of welcoming people, which also includes, though, discerning those who are here to cause trouble, and in other words, to commit crimes, who have a stake in human trafficking as well as drug trafficking. It requires the cooperation with other governments throughout the world and helping other governments to be strong against those who otherwise would dominate them, like the cartels. It also requires on our part a disposition that doesn't immediately see anyone who's coming or desiring to come to this country as an enemy. All right, we don't need a wall, but we do need a sound border. And that is required for peace in order for us to reach out to those who are seeking help, seeking asylum, seeking refugee status, and seeking to be immigrants to our nation.
Thank you.
Thank you. I would underline all of what the bishop just said. I think that, however, that I want to remind us of Jesus' parable that Matthew sort of puts as his closing address in Matthew 25, verses 31 and following, when he talks about where we should look for God and how we should exercise our love for God. And one of the places was, he says, I was a stranger and you welcomed me, or you did not. This has to do with how we love God.
I read or perused a white paper by the George Bush Institute titled Smart Border Policy for the 21st Century. And just real quickly, the paper said that to help this situation, that we should develop a regional law enforcement cooperation with El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Mexico, and of course our country. It talks about border metrics and building a modern migration system at the U.S. and Mexico border. And the document is a pretty good document. I don't know why it's not implemented. And I think one of the most confusing things is that it seems like at the border we have a help wanted sign, but no trespassing, on the other side. And I think that can be confusing to people. I will say quickly that the response, we have a Baptist pastor at the border and has done a tremendous job. I mean, and this is just a few years ago, he had ministered to 17,000 migrants, given out over 7,000 Bibles, served over 28,000 meals. and just is doing a dynamic job ministering and caring for those, the migrants, refugees when they get here. And so, you know, people are made in the image of God, and we just should do everything we can to minister to them. Simultaneously, we do have a border, and we need laws in place to that needs to be executed. And how that happens, you know, we'll leave it up to the folks who make the rules, who enforce the rules.
So I'm reminded that on the base of the Statue of Liberty, I think is written Emma Lazarus's poem, "Give me your tired and your poor." And I think about some of the strength that we see in American society today, and that is because of immigrants that came generations ago who came to America and adopted the American dream as their own dream and built this country to be that light to the nations that Isaiah talked about, which is why it is a beacon to which so many people are drawn from much more desperate places on the globe. And I think that that comes a responsibility for us to find ways to open the door a little wider to that American dream. Thank God I had the miracle of birth in the United States of America, and I get to walk around with the United States passport. I didn't earn that. My immigrant ancestors earned that for me. And it was the people who allowed my ancestors to come into this country and to build their lives and to contribute in all the ways that they've done generation after generation that allows me to have my American life here. And I feel like we need to pay forward that privilege that we all have, however it was we got here. Not all of us got here by choice, but the fact that we get to live in this incredible country that preserves freedom as well as it does is something that we need to, I think, really remember. Last thing I would say is the 20th century philosopher Emmanuel Levinas said, "Respect for the stranger and the sanctification of God's name are strangely equivalent." And I think that we have to remember that respecting the stranger and sanctifying God's name go hand in hand.
Well, thank you all so much. The Charter of the American Religious Town Hall provides that Roman Catholics, Protestant, Jews, educators, and others may appear on this program and can declare their beliefs without hesitancy. And the rest of the members of the panel will uphold and guarantee that American right to all who will appear, irrespective of race or creed, so that the rest of the world can see that here in America, we believe in civil and religious freedom, not only in theory, but in reality. And now, friends, until next week at the same time and over the same channel, the American Religious Town Hall meeting stands adjourned. And may the God of all of us bless all of you.